Not only does Joe Mechlinski have an amazing journey, but is also working on the future of work. And it's a fascinating conversation that I hope you will enjoy today with Joe Mechlinski. Enjoy this conversation. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. I'm so happy to be able to speak with my friend Joe Mechlinski. Joe is a fascinating individual, as you're going to discover in the next few minutes and 45 minutes. We'll see how long we are. There's so many things to discuss. He is a New York Times bestseller. He's a TEDx speaker. He is also the founder and CEO of Shift, where they want to change the way you work so they don't change the way you live. And he's also a partner in Conscious Venture Partners, which is investing in business owned by women or by minorities. Fascinating individual. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
You bet, and thanks for having me.
Of course. I've been waiting for that for a long time, and I'm thrilled that you're here today. But first thing first, what is your journey?
Well, I'll try to keep that part brief, but I think it is unique. I think we all have a unique story. I grew up in the inner city in Baltimore. To short circuit the easiest way to describe the environment, I tell people if they've seen the HBO show The Wire, it's essentially the neighborhood in which I grew up in. And so I, kind of had young parents who were trying to figure life out. And by the time I got to high school, I'd been to 5 schools in 5 years. And, kind of was in an environment where the fridge wasn't always filled with food. And the high school that I got to, we had the #1 football team in the state. I played football, but we were also the worst academically performing high school in the state. We had a 23% graduation rate. So it was a little bit of a mix of a lot of things going on there. And I was able, through a lot of really cool people stepping in and stepping up for me, giving me a hand up, not an out, as I like to say, I got to Hopkins, even though I was coming from a pretty, academically challenged environment. So that was like my first big quantum leap. And when I got to Hopkins, I was like, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm going to have to figure something else out. And so I became an entrepreneur. I started up a couple of small businesses that did really well in the late 90s. And business just clicked for me. I think my sports background, the fact that I was always kind of hustling, the fact that, I've got really great parents who instilled some just blue collar values of just showing up, doing the right thing, working hard, being humble, had really helped. And so when I left college, I went through some personal challenges. I lost my mom, and it was after a really long, she had 2 pancreas transplants, 2 kidney transplants. She was blind. She was in a wheelchair. I was her only child. She was in the hospital for 4 straight years, and she passed. And that had marked the 23rd person I had lost by the time I was 23.
Oh,
so
my God.
I was in it, and had a big job at a big consulting firm all lined up after school. And like my world is falling apart, as you can imagine, and just trying to live through that moment. And, I just had another mentor show up and said, you're not employable. Don't go do this job. And so I started Shift with a partner at the time who had a lot more experience. And at 23, I started doing management consulting for other companies and kind of didn't look back. I used the idea of learning and development to put ourselves in situations where we had to figure things out. We had to find a way. So I read 1,000 books on business, management, philosophy, history, not in an actual 1,000+ books. I went to every conference, every community. I got really smart mentors who, some were billionaires, to help me think through how to help businesses grow regardless. And so after about 12 years, I put all these messages in a bottle called a book. And as you kindly introduced me, when I launched my first book, it hit the New York Times. It was the #1 book in the world for 3 days. On Barnes & Noble, we beat 50 Shades of Grey, which was kind of cool.
Wow.
And that was like another quantum leap of my story. I started working with bigger companies, and our little management consulting company, we got the chance to go work with John Hancock and New Balance and Crocs at the executive level. And, here we are. I'm this kid who is still just making it up as I go along. And we built up a really nice model. It gave me the opportunity to, as you said, get involved in a VC firm and just, begin to think about like, how do we help? Look, fundamentally, the reason I got into this is because we spent all of our time at work. And I didn't do that out of school. But I can tell you this, there's not a person I've ever met who thinks that we're doing this the right way. There's nothing that you're going to read in a book that says to bring out high performance, treat people like a child, make them show up at a certain time, at a certain place. It's never going to say that.
Nope.
Yet, that's the play we run, and we've been running, as you saw in my TEDx talk, because we've always done it that way. So that's really, I think, just a quick version of how I got here and a little bit about my journey.
You're a very humble person, because I've listened to different people that had to overcome tough challenges, and they presented like, oh yeah, and today's shining, yesterday was raining, like it was nothing. And that requires a lot of grit and perseverance. And also, to your point, mentor, I remember I was a teenager, and I was not in the same environment. I was in a very privileged environment in the south of Belgium, but there was some challenges. But I remember there was a cafe that we would go for lunch, and I was always playing the pinball machine, Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man. And by the way, if you find it one day, I'm still looking for it. It's not the game, it's the pinball machine, Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man. But next to it, you had the billiard where you have to pull and the ball goes in numbers.
Yeah.
And you try to line those numbers. I don't know the name of that machine, but I clearly remember that one day I wanted to try it. And the owner of the cafe, his name was Luca. He looked at me, he said, "You don't touch that." I said, "What do you mean?" I see people coming here on the 30th of the month when they're getting their paycheck and spend everything on this machine. It's a drug. You don't touch it. And I've never forgot it. So having mentors is obviously absolutely important. Now, when you have the journey that you have, and now you see the way people work, what is your take on, talking about the so-called life-work balance and the hybrid model? What is the ideal structure when you consult with companies, and what is the ideal type of leaders that you believe are making companies successful?
It's a great question. And I would say I have an answer, but not the answer. And what I would just start with is that the traffic patterns in organizations have changed. I mean, before the pandemic, there were a few really good answers, a few really good practices about how you brought out the best in people, unlocking discretionary effort, building what I would call a healthy and high-performing organization. But now, March 16, 2020 was when most companies started to allow their office workers to work from home. And to me, that was like a table flipping moment. And I think as that earthquake hit, we're still feeling the aftershock of that. And I think in a lot of ways, we're trying to cling back onto a few of those ways. So while Twitter is making everybody come back, maybe I should do that. And I would say right now, just like, health is really an N of one. What might be good for you might not be good for me. And I think right now, the play for an organization is to figure out like what's going to make sense for them, not what Amazon's doing, not what Deloitte's doing, not what another management guru is saying, because everybody's situation is a little different. So there are a lot of challenges with hybrid. There are a lot of challenges with not having people gather together in an office. But if we're being intellectually honest, there was also a lot of challenges of having people show up Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 too. And so, now we all have a little bit of a different chessboard to try to make sense of, because like, as an example, I moved out of Baltimore during the pandemic. So did a lot of our team. We had a beautiful office there. We've been remote first. We really haven't done a hybrid model. We see each other maybe once every 6 weeks or so. And arguably, I think we should meet more. Now, having said that, I was just I had a dinner with a client, 10,000 employees, and they've had people back in probably for like the last year. And I kind of agree with it because I know their model. Now, it doesn't mean that they haven't unlocked some ideas about flexibility and offering that But for their model, based on the labor market for that business, it makes a lot of sense to go, hey, we need to mentor the next generation, because it's one of their biggest priorities is how are we going to keep that millennial or boomer, or not boomer, I pointed myself, Xer. How are we going to keep that person growing into an executive level presence? It's not going to happen sitting in their house all day. They're going to have to be around people. Now, having said that, why do people work on Fridays still? I don't know. There's a lot of things that I think you can still play with in terms of, looking at 3 or 4 day weeks. I think, having, week-long Zoom out gatherings, where companies get together on a monthly basis to do that, or, just get creative with how do you solve the problem of building an environment where people feel seen, heard, understood, where they feel like the organization and the teams, the individuals that make up the team have their back. That's exactly the North Star to me. And then everybody's got to figure out how to take what they've got to take that journey over to that place.
And to your point, I fully agree with that. I believe that that's also the future success of companies will be based on leaders that are able to, servant leadership is a term that I've heard for many years, but true servant leaders is a different story. So when you're looking at the companies you're working with and consulting with, the old model of command and control versus unlimited holidays and 4 days a week. What's your take on those two extremes, and what do you advise leaders to do?
So again, part of the exercise is going to sound like a revolving door of the same answer, which is where do you want to go and what's most important along the way? Mm-hmm. If you're a high-tech growth company and you're attempting to take your company from, say, 2 million in ARR to 20, you might need everybody together a lot. If you're a lifestyle business, which there isn't a bad or wrong thing about that, you're growing at 10, 20% a year, you may not need that same level of intense focus, which is why when Elon said, everybody get back, everybody's like, well, that must mean everyone should. No, he was clear about it. Look, we're doing something remarkable. I've slashed the employee base by 70+%. We're going to see if we can still run the platform with 1,700 employees, and they're doing it. And the ripple effect, by the way, of that is also interesting, because to me, regardless of where you are on the continuum of in office, not in office, what I think we're also seeing is like, what's the output? What does work look like? And I think the management layers within businesses, you can see Meta is certainly going through their riff and all of these different organizations that sort of overhired above the mean of the growth over the last couple of years. And by the way, you would have too, I would have, like, we were all chasing that demand surge. Yeah. Now there's a reversion back to the mean, and now there's a correction and everybody's freaking out. But if you look at the headcount of these organizations before the pandemic and where they are now, they're still way above. So look, I think this is a good, healthy thing. It's not that we should be, excited that people are losing their jobs, but there are still 10 million open positions.
10 million.
10 million. This is not a Great Depression moment. This is
in the US only?
In the US.
Wow.
I will double check that stat, but as of a month ago, it's been between 8 and 10 million open positions.
That's insane.
Now, look, you got a lot of truck drivers, you got a lot of blue collar work. So there's definitely a part of that. There's construction, there's retail, but there's also, non-big tech companies looking for data scientists or AI prompt engineers or whatever the case may be. And so I think, again, we're kind of at a neat moment because, you're getting a lot of these things beginning to sort of converge and start to roll over on each other. And I think in like 2 or 3 years, like if we just really thought about what 2019 felt like, and now we're in 2023, 4 years later, none of these things would have been things I thought were on the table.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we were not talking about 4 years ago is actually the decrease in population. Because I've read several articles that are projecting the Chinese population to actually go down to 900 million in a few years. If you look at the implication on the famous supply chain of that, that's one thing. But also here, on one hand, you have AI and all the jobs are going to disappear. And how many jobs are going to be created thanks to that and new jobs? So going back to what you were saying about the different generation and keeping people in the company, what is important for employees today, and what should leaders focus on to retain people and to retain not the boomers, the boomers, they're going to sell me their company. The the Xer and the millennium and the Z and whatnot in the alphabet.
Look, I think the first question is, are you sure you want to retain? And what does even retention mean? Because this is no longer a forever game. My dad has worked for the same company for 46 years. He's the real hero in my story. He's a guy that started out sweeping floors, and now he's an executive in a 4,000 person company without a college degree. He's a unicorn. Doesn't happen like that. And again, it's not to say that there aren't those exceptions or those examples. However, I do think most organizations need to look at what's the average tenure in your marketplace. If you're in the management consulting or tech-enabled consultancy that we are, it's 2.7 years, and it's been that for quite some time. So the question is, what are you going to do to either meet that, exceed that, and how do you do that with an allocation of capital and resources that just outsmarts the other bear? Because remember, as the joke goes, you don't need to be faster than the bear. You just need to be faster than the person you're with. And so I think in a lot of cases, this is an example of like, what are the things that, flexibility, freedom within a framework, giving people the idea of growth and opportunity. And I think ultimately a stake in the outcome. We've recently raised money. We have this platform that we're taking to market, and we unlocked a bunch of shares and options for everybody, because I know there's a difference between like babysitting someone else's kid and having your own, right? And you don't need to have children to understand the analogy. And I think in a lot of ways, from a business standpoint, if you asked most executives, the number one thing they care about is getting their people to care as much as they do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And what does Warren Buffett say? Show me the incentive structure and I'll show you the outcome. Well, if people don't have a stake in the outcome, likely they're just going to, operate. I mean, Adam Smith said this, Nassim Taleb, who's written a lot about these kinds of, economic behavioral patterns that people have, Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. Like, again, we have I think some updating of the software to do about why people do what they do. And then look, back to your command and control continuum. It worked because people didn't have any other options. It worked because that was also part of the value set of that generation. I think if your listeners want to go check out an amazing book, it's called Reinventing Organizations by a French guy. He used to be a McKinsey consultant. His name is, I'm going to forget his name, Jacques. I'll look it up later, but okay. I'm blanking on it here for a second. But it's a really amazing book that talks about the history of human civilization and society as opposed to and juxtaposed against business. Like back in the day, it made sense that we were command and control, but society is different now. Society is giving people a voice, and I don't know that that's such a bad thing.
I was just Googling what you were saying. It says Frédéric Laloux.
Frederick Laloux. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for my accent. I'll say it again in English. Frederick Laloux.
You're a terrible, terrible American accent.
One thing that I was thinking about listening to you when you're talking about the longevity in the company, do you say 2.7 years? Is that, and then people leave?
In the management consulting space, yes.
That's insane, because you're spending all this energy, time, and money to train people. Why won't you try to keep them?
Well, but what if you thought about it this way, which is, so back in the early 90s, there was a company called Enterprise Rent-A-Car that most people have heard of. There was a large shortage of, what they wanted was college graduates to sit behind a retail desk and rent cars. So the two founders, Jack, and I believe his brother's name was Frank Taylor, came up with this idea of a management and training program, which has been obviously co-opted hundreds, if not thousands of times by big banks and the like. But essentially what they did is they went to college campuses and said, we have a management and training program. It lasts 2 years. 85% of you after 2 years are going to take this resume and go off to a big corporate America job. The other 15% will stay and will graduate you up through the ranks. Now, listen, I get the 2 years happens quick, but again, it is a forcing function. The constraint itself allows sort of necessity is the mother of all inventions. And so if you know that is the mark. Maybe you say, look, at Shift, our average tenure is way over 6 or 7 years. So what did I do to extend it? Well, think about the cost it takes to bring someone in. Usually 2.5 times their full compensation. Well, then why don't I give that back to the people who stay twice as long?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't, that's, to me, it's algebra 2 is really what executives need to play out.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely. There's this other quote, which I love, is the CEO and the CFO speaking together. And the CFO said, we're spending so much on training those people. Imagine if they leave. And then the CEO said, imagine if we don't train them and they stay.
Right.
Well, on that note, my experience was mainly with the meetings and event industry. And my take on that, and I've said it many times, I feel that in that industry, people will not really invest in their own education because of the familiarization trip, because of the hosted buyer programs and everything. Where in other industry, I had the impression that people were actually more investing themselves in their own growth. What do you see the future of that? And what's your recommendation for anybody listening if they really want to go up in their organization, especially today with all the content which is available online?
Yeah, I think, look, everyone has a different plan. Everybody has a different personality. Everybody has maybe a different point of view about what a good life, a well-lived life looks like. So I think, again, we're back to an N of 1. But if you, generally speaking, want to talk to a professional, I would say that I am someone whose, again, academic background was a bit challenging. If I were to tell you that my SAT score on my verbal was a 400 when they scored it back like that, and that, my spelling words were Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday my senior year of high school, and yet I've written 2 books and I've done all these cool, amazing things. And what I would say is it's just about learning. So whether you're consuming content and then applying it from a book perspective, whether you're on LinkedIn Learning or all these other amazing platforms, I would carve out no less than 10 to 20% of my week. And I would be investing in myself. And, I've probably spent, well into the 7 figures in my own learning and development. Now that comes in the form of, I've taken online graduate classes. I've, again, bought a few books here and there. I've joined communities that you and I are both a part of on a yearly basis to put ourselves in a room where I'm clearly not the smartest, but I'm a really, really good student. Yeah. I might be one of the best students because I'm really good, believe it or not always, but sometimes good at listening and then doing.
Yeah.
You just got to remove what you think one of the best frames for this is, again, back to the book Thinking Fast and Slow, about the way our brains make patterns. We're basically pattern making machines. We see things, and our brain is sort of creating these neural pathways that sort of help us understand, am I going to get eaten by the bear? Is it a snake or a stick? What do I think about this particular piece? That shortcut is a bias. Now, we all have heard of confirmation bias, but I think the better bias to think about as a business leader is the availability bias. And so this basically says there is information that there's information that you don't know. And most people will acknowledge those 2 things. What a lot of people won't acknowledge is that there's things then that you don't know, which is an unlock to imagine we only have put words to some of these most complex subjects in the last few decades. We're still making this up. We're still figuring it out. And so if that's true, the invitation, I think, is for all of us, regardless of your story, your background, to acknowledge it. Like right now, we're on the edge, the precipice of drone technology that will have vertical ascension of an Uber that you and I are going to get into next time that we're hanging out together. Or AI that is going to do a full body scan of both of us, tell us exactly, based on lots of data, how we're going to die. It exists, right? And then you start to roll up all these other things like blockchain, advanced manufacturing, 3D printing. All of these things are converging right now, and pretty exciting.
I agree. Very exciting times, absolutely. with a lot of challenges as well. But hey, that's what it is. Joe, you've been TEDx speaker. You are a TEDx speaker. Can you tell us a little bit about the process, how you get invited, but more importantly, how you design the content and the work that took to actually get ready to be on stage?
So I had a pretty famous for Maryland football coach in high school, and he would open up every year of practice the same way. He would say, "My name is Roger Wren, and I've been preparing for this my whole life." And so I would say to anybody who's looking to do a TEDx talk, I have been a big fan of TED since it really was, came onto the scene in 2004, 5, and 6. When TEDx came out in 2008, I applied immediately. You can go find my really crappy audition tape on YouTube. I've left it up on purpose. And then I just kind of put it in the rear view. I didn't really pursue it. And I hate when someone tells a story like this because it makes it sound like crap just falls from the ceiling. But in this moment, it kind of did. Oh. I got a call from one of the curators in the DC chapter, and she was looking for someone to speak about the future of work. I don't remember exactly how they found me. And then we started the process. And I said, she's like, "We have a speaker coach. It's a 14 to 18 minute talk. It needs to be rehearsed." And I'm not someone who rehearses a script. Yeah. I'm an extemporaneous speaker. I barely use PowerPoint. I don't talk at, I talk with the group. Part of my secret over the last 20 years is that the very first training I ever did was for the DC Police Department, the 23 highest ranking members of the DC Police Department. It's a long story how we got it, but it was post 9/11. They had to do it. So I'm 23 years old walking into folks with JDs, MBAs, full uniform, guns and all, teaching them about leadership. I didn't know anything. So, the first day went okay. The second day, all the old guard didn't show up because they didn't like what I had to say. And it was a really humbling experience, as a first sort of taste of, can we pull this off? So what I learned in that was you got to ask questions. And if you just ask questions and you listen, I'm not kidding. That's how I run the meeting. Like, "Hey, how's everybody feeling? What's most important to you? What would you like to talk about today?" And then we start to co-create, or as Keith Ferrazzi says, we co-elevate each other in these conversations. So in any event, that's not how TEDx works. It's basically like McDonald's. They got a way, they got a process, they want you to stick to the script. And that was really difficult for me. I will give Kim Casey at the DC TEDx just a lot of credit for putting up with all my crap. I did get a speaker's coach who was a buddy of mine. And as you can tell, I can't say anything in 14 minutes. It's just impossible. I was like, so that was one. How do I tell what I think I could tell? Two, I'm writing a new book called Who Says? The whole point of the book is we got to stop looking for answers from the sage on the stage. Like, when you think about this, it's an authority bias. We grew up having parents telling us no, and then teachers telling us no. We know that the average child asks 125 questions a day. The average adult only asks 6. It's because we've been beating our willpower down because that's not the way it's done. We don't do it that way. It is what it is, right? All of these isms have prevented us from really, asking the tough questions. And so when I think about Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, what's the future of work? Well, you know how many times, go Google future of work and TEDx. It's not like we need another opinion trying to create what I would call like a church. Follow me. Mine is the way. This is not the Mandalorian, right? This is not the way. It is a way.
Right.
So for me, this book that I'm writing, I'm halfway through, called Who Says, it's a book that's not intended to give advice. It's a book intended to invite sovereignty and curiosity and questioning. And so the talk you got a chance to see was really about that. It was, who says work has to suck? Who says we have to do it this way? Who says your company won't change? Who says we need legacy in the way that we thought about it? And just wanted to invite some of that inquiry so that this was maybe one of the first TEDx talks that didn't give advice. That was the point. And I think in a lot of ways that helped stand out a bit. I don't like to brag, but it was kind of cool that it was ranked the 40th talk out of 15,900 last year.
Wow.
And it's been a really interesting.
Say that again.
Talk.
The 40th.
So it was the number one talk in August worldwide. Then 4 months later, to wrap up the year, so we only had 4 months at it, we were still ranked the 40th talk out of 15,900 talks globally last year.
Amazing. Congratulations. So how many times did you rehearse before getting on stage?
The kids are about to come in here. I could have them confirm this, but more times than I've ever rehearsed anything in my life. We would be sitting at the table. Dinner time's a big deal for us. And I would say, did you know in 1862, an American inventor by the name of Charles Scull was granted the patent for the world's first typewriter? There was only one problem. And then I would go through this whole bit and they were like, oh God, here goes dad again. And at first, my wife was like, no, everybody pay attention. I was like, no. I got a 9 and 11-year-old at the time. I don't want them to pay it. In fact, make me work for it. Like if I can't get you engaged in this, it means I need to keep changing the content. So like I do always, I was basically telling in 14 minutes, 3 to 6 different stories at a time, weaving them sort of all together in a way that sort of shared some of my personal background, what I see, what I think the opportunity is, what's been said before, what's been done before. And again, I think what the opportunity is I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I think when I speak about these things, the reason people sort of go, yeah, it makes sense, is because it's like self-evident. These are like, this is collective intelligence. We all know when we hear it.
Yeah.
And so I think what I've been able to do sometimes, because I didn't come from a traditional background, I didn't have this long corporate America thing, right? I kind of just started off. The quote I love is, you can't read the label on the jar you're in.
Oh, I love it.
And so for me, I've been reading the label on the jar that I'm not in the whole time because I've never really been in that grouping, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a pretty big advantage of having that objectivity. So it was a lot of work. I'm really happy that it turned out the way that it did. My dad was there. Our kids were there. My godfather was there. A lot of friends and family, as you know, and it was a big moment.
Congrats again. That's amazing. So what's next? The TED stage?
Well, I guess we can talk about this a little bit. So I have been a volunteer as part of this thing called the Tony Hsieh Award, which is a delegation established to honor the late CEO and founder of Zappos. Now, most people know Zappos for their customer service. For folks listening, you might know them because of the culture innovations and the sort of the radical edge that Tony went down. Everything from he would pay people to quit, to instead of making people work for the job, he would find a way to make the role around the person, to he got rid of management entirely. And so, the success of Zappos essentially being bought by Amazon for $1 billion in cash is a cool story in the sense that Amazon had SKUs, all of these, not just books, all of this stuff. And here comes Zappos with one SKU, a shoe, and somehow outflanks Amazon through customer service, through employee engagement and culture, and just trusting the process and system. So of course, it's a shame that he passed. And there's definitely a light that should be shined on the work and his legacy. And so this award model is attempting to be a bigger and better model than exists out there today. So when we think about the best places to work, this is not about your foosball table or the fact that you offer a little bit more vacation. It's like, what's the soul and the essence of the organization? So anyway, I'm part of this little delegation. We handed out awards to Dropbox last year to a company called Mind Bloom and Human Bees. That group is now going into TED, and I get a chance to just continue to be part of that community. And I'm excited that, we get a chance to, recruit, enlist other folks to do that. And, what most people won't get from this quick conversation is that I have built a platform from a culture perspective that is, I think, the first platform for the executive to get their team on the same page weekly without scheduling more meetings.
Amazing.
So we have an AI-driven tech platform that we're going to be using at TED to really, not like at TED, but post-TED, to really work with a few of those leaders and help them think about asynchronous collaboration and how to think about AI from the C-suite. And ultimately, because we don't walk the halls, we're not gathering as much as we once did, there was power in proximity. And now in a hybrid or remote environment, if anyone's ever been in a long distance personal relationship, you know it's hard to manage.
Yes.
And that's essentially what work has become. So this is a way to not overschedule more meetings, because Microsoft came out with a really cool stat that we've scheduled 252% more meetings since the pandemic, which is one of the leading causes to burnout.
Wow.
Second, really amazing stat. When an executive sends out an email, the average open rate is 70%, not 100. Of the 70% that are opening it, 45%, almost half, spend less than 9 seconds reading the email.
Good, because they're quick. They're small emails.
TikTok brain, skimming, scrolling, scanning. Nothing is sticking. We haven't done this exercise for a little bit.
Absolutely.
So what our platform does is it sort of interrupts that pattern. It asks a question, it shares a video story, and then it invites action for a very quick. It's almost like Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning, has this famous quote that the distance between the stimulus and the response, as a person, like if someone pulls you over and like cuts you off, you're really mad because the stimulus, they pulled me over, the response, F you, right? Like the whole thing. But in business, you actually need to go the other way, which is when the leader says something, how long does it take to get a response? How long does it take to see movement different? What's the stick rate? And I will tell you, most organizations that are being led by honest and aware leaders see that there is a lag. And that lag time is creating this tension, this stress, not really being able to keep up with the pain or the pace of change. So part of what we're trying to attack is that.
Wow. And I love asynchronous communication. It's very easy. It actually goes faster in terms of exchanging Q&A and feedbacks.
Yeah.
I really love that concept. What is the name of your platform if people want to go on it and check it in?
If they go to shiftthework.com/latch. Latch is LATCH.
Shiftthework.com/latch.
Yep.
Wonderful. The conversation here, and I love every time I'm listening to you and spend hours. And to your point, the format of the podcast, it is what it is. We know each other thanks to this amazing MMT community that Jason Gaignard started. So I cannot end this podcast without asking you the champagne question.
Ooh.
So when we meet again in a year with a bottle of Dom Perignon, because I want real champagne, what are we going to celebrate?
Well, I'll bring Veuve. You bring your Dom Perignon. And I'll probably bring a joint too, just so we really spice this up.
And I'll bring a cigar.
There you go. It's a great question. And I would say, we're going to be in a position where we'll have about 50 companies on our platform. We'll probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30,000 employees who will be on this platform. We'll have a sentiment of that many people so that when you're a CEO and you're going, is my team, relatively speaking, slower or faster than the pool? You'll be able to know. Just like Waze helps you go from point A to point B by avoiding the pitfalls or the problem areas, that's what Latch, we hope at that point, will be doing. So if we're in a position where we really are not just a platform, not just a tech-enabled program helping clients figure this whole thing out, but we become a body of wisdom and a body of knowledge that can be flipped back to the marketplace and just be helpful. Because I think right now that's really the other value in business that you're going to start seeing is like, I want to share this. It should be open source. It should be You're seeing a lot of companies right now use their AI chatbots to sort of put up their learning and development so that everyone can just stop with the BS, the noise, and just go, hey, how do we help each other go a little faster? Yes, everything's a competition at some level, but there are some things we don't need to compete in, and there's some things that we should. And let's just find out maybe where the adjustment to that line needs to be.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to see you again at the next MMT conference.
Thanks, Ben.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time. And wow, I absolutely love what you're doing, the work you're putting out there. And I can wait to see more successes from you and more TEDx or TED speeches. So thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please go on LinkedIn or join my Facebook group, eventbusinessformula.com/group. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.